Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the Reinsurance Podcast. I'm your co-host, Jared Lee.
And I'm Ben Rose. And we are gathered here today with a very special guest. In fact, one that yesterday, when I mentioned it to a friend that we had this guest coming, was compared to or described as industry royalty, which is very thematic.
Following the Jubilee, I feel this is very thematic.
So
welcome to the podcast, Vicky Carter.
Thank you so much. That's a fairly grand introduction. I'm under pressure now to live up to it.
Yeah, we're expecting a royal wave to the camera at some point.
Oh my goodness, I can do that. Won't be royal though.
No, exactly. Well, we'll reserve the mall. We'll have a whole celebration. It'll be a big to-do.
Excellent. I love it.
We've booked all manner of acts, theater acts, and everything else.
The bigger the party, the better.
Exactly.
As far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Jared's invited Lin-Manuel. The main thing.
He's just not returning my calls. It's very strange.
Elton John's coming, I hear.
Yeah, always.
All steaming in. Coldplay.
I mean, speaking of this, actually, and we've got a ton of topics we want to dive into today.
Sure.
But one of them we'll come into much more detail is talent and the industry talent. But you actually have, as I understand it, and according to lots of gossip, a very special event happening next week with some secret musical guests.
Absolutely. Right? So, in fact, the week after next, so the 29th and 30th of June, we will be holding the 6th Marsh and McLennan Rising Professionals Global Forum and Gala Night. So the idea behind this is to bring in world-class speakers on all the critical topics facing the industry and have speakers speak to an audience of the up-and-coming, basically the next leaders of our industry. Over the course of 2 days, and then they've been concentrating hard over those 2 days. So we decided what would be fun is to have the CEOs back who sponsor those young people for a big gala night. And basically, we've got 1,000 people at Old Billingsgate.
Wow!
We have a phenomenal guest speaker, and we've got 2 world famous music acts who'll be performing that night. And I can't tell you the names of any of them because we keep it a complete secret to the night.
It's a proper surprise.
But just to give you a little taste, in the past, I've had Craig David, I've had the Kaiser Chiefs, I've had Rudimental. So the pressure is seriously on to make sure that we get better and better.
Well, reinsurance royalty, that's what we expect now.
Exactly. I was going to ask you, is there a way that you find these performers? Is it because you've at some point magically reinsured them?
Oh, I'd love to say I've played with them or something like that. But no, nothing as great as those. Obviously, the most difficult, the speakers are actually relatively easy to find and are usually very engaging in helping us sort of, deliver this. The most difficult are the pop stars. Who usually have horrendous riders and are really expensive. Yeah. So sometimes anything over cost we give to charity. So sometimes we can utilize the charities to help us secure. Okay. So Kaiser Chiefs was really kindly donated by Teenage Cancer Trust, who we donated the funds to that year. Craig David was sponsored by Aspen, actually very kindly sponsored that act. So we've had some really generous sponsorships to enable us to really have the best performers and the best speakers. So it's something that I feel passionate about because I don't think we do enough for young people in this industry. So I'm certainly, as I came through the industry, there's nothing like that. So for me, it's really important to be able to deliver platforms where they can engage with each other. Sure, we'll come on to this, but even more important now than it was even 2 years ago before pandemic, that we get people back to face. And secondly, just for them to see how diverse this industry is, because there's something for everybody. And, we're covering topics from insurtech to pandemic to climate change, carbon capture, carbon trading, leadership skills, all those critical topics, insurtech, and amazing speakers on each of those topics. So it's a wonderful day for anybody. Forget, the rising talent, but existing talent in the market, just to have the experience over 2 days to hear sort of world-class speakers on all those topics.
Yeah. And we'll come on to your career in a bit more detail in a bit, but going back to when you were first joining the industry, how did you figure out what you wanted to do?
I had no idea. It was totally, if I'm absolutely honest, I started off leaving school thinking I was going to be a doctor.
Okay.
And here I am in the insurance industry. Why? Because I flunked a physics paper. So, I failed that. And guess what? Where did everybody else come? It was fate. I heard my calling. So I was very lucky that I just really pushed into the city by my father. He said, "You're not having another year off swanning around in between going back to medical school." He said, "You need to work." And something came up in the insurance industry. It was a very boring job, but thankfully through that, I was introduced to some underwriters who said, "We need to train you up as a junior underwriter."
Mm-hmm.
Now, back in those days, which is a long time ago, there were no females allowed on the underwriting boxes, so I had to go broking. And here I am all these years later, still broking.
Yeah, these are the really interesting things we've changed as an industry. But this isn't, like you joke, but this isn't actually that long ago where women weren't allowed in the underwriting room and things like this. We've made a lot of strides, and I think we'll talk again more about some of the initiatives that you back. But there's a real push now to how do we improve D&I across this space, and it comes from efforts like yours over the last number of years to sort of really put a lens on this and a light on this to how do we do better here? How do we help break down some barriers that have been sort of historically put in place that if we want to be better, if we want to attract the best people, we need to solve for some of these things.
I think we've got to be better at demonstrating to young people how exciting an industry it is.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you ask most people at school, what do you think about insurance? They'll all go, well, pretty boring, really. And their imagination will take them to something very dull.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, those of us who are fortunate enough to have been through the industry know it's it's probably one of the fastest, most dynamic industries there is, because everything that touches life is touched by our industry. Nothing would exist without our industry.
Mm-hmm.
And the societal good that we deliver, again, as an industry is huge, but I don't think the public appreciate it. And I think that that's something very important to the younger generation, is the societal good. They are quite focused on things like that, and particularly as we've seen around climate change, they're all very sort of involved in, or want to be involved in, sort of doing things to prevent, further climate change. So I think, we need to be much better at promoting the industry, number one.
Mm-hmm.
When we do get young people in, we've got to keep them, because what we can't do is lose them. So I think that needs more engagement from leadership of companies to get them involved, to listen, to help them, from a really early stage. And I think, the younger generation are very different from our generation. And I think what we need to understand is, what do they want in their lives? They want things faster. We know that. Now, that's sometimes good. It's sometimes bad. So you've got to be careful of the balance there. But the other thing is being more flexible. And I think one thing we have benefited from the whole experience of COVID is flexibility around work, that we can still perform the work that we all have to do. We can do some of it remotely. Now, there are huge benefits in some instances being remote, and there are huge negatives. But I think what we can offer is flexibility, and I think that's very important for the next generation. And particularly, you touch on females. When people, have babies, they want to come back. Flexibility will help them do that. Whereas in the past, if you don't come back full time, well, we can't take you back. So there's, huge advantages that we should learn from what we've all experienced through COVID and try and incorporate that into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess you've had dual abilities to understand how this is shaping the market, not just with Guy Carpenter, but also with your Lloyd's hat on as well.
Yeah.
How's that been, just sitting with that view as well, I guess?
Yeah, the thing that I think upsets a lot of us who've been around Lloyd's a long time is seeing the underwriting room empty on certain days. Monday and Friday. I think, it looks like Friday's certainly changing at the moment for the foreseeable future, that most people work from home. But, it's sad seeing the room empty. We've got to get people back. One thing we can't detract from is the fact it's a face-to-face business, and it's where face-to-face meetings are so much more valuable in many respects than doing things remotely. It's those random meetings when you're walking up to Lloyd's or walking around Lloyd's. I walked up this morning and bumped into a few people on the way out. You don't do that when you're at home. Mm-hmm. And for young people, how are we ever going to pass those relationships? We can give them all the intellectual capital they'll need. The one thing we can't pass on is relationships. So how do we help them build those? And that to me is what's important, which again, why I'm so passionate about the Rising Professionals event, because it brings young people together. It gives them a chance to meet and chat over 2 days. Okay, it's not long, but hopefully there will be 1 or 2 friendships made during that time. And we need to do more of that.
Yeah, it's one of those things, actually. I walked past a small sign outside a coffee shop this morning that said, make sure you look out for and enjoy the little things, because you might one day look back and remember that they're the big things. And for me, the experience, as you say, of walking around Leadenhall or Lime Street,
amazing.
You bump into people.
It's a big community, and we are I think we're the last face-to-face trading market, and we should sort of respect that, and we should try and cultivate it even more. And you look at people who come from overseas, and the fact that we can walk out our office and we could see 10 people, maybe even 15 people from different companies, meetings with them in one day, is what a great position to be in. I think for Lloyd's, one of the things we've got to look at is how do we evolve the building? How do we bring the building back to the center where people want to be and what goes on? And so I think there's discussions going around how do we redesign that. Yeah. It's something I know, John Neal's very, very passionate about doing. So there's a lot of thought going into these things. It's not easy to think, how you restructure some of those things, but certainly a lot of consideration going into it now.
Yeah, well, and those relationships are so centric. We talk about it a lot, and it's not only in understanding what the deal is, but it's access to deals. People move around, but once people really get into this industry, they're pretty much here for their careers now. But they'll move companies, and it's bumping into people who you used to know at one syndicate, and they've gone to another syndicate, or they've gone to a broker now, and it's this sort of relationship centricity that drives this engagement and deal flow and access to information. It's super important. And you're right, if it just goes purely digital, all you see is a LinkedIn update that someone moved, but there's no emotional connection to that sort of stuff. So especially in the London market, I think you'll see a real push to move back towards face-to-face interaction as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think also, for overseas people, you get a lot of the US companies, they love coming to London. They want to meet their underwriters and sort of, eyeball them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important, because also the other thing that we mustn't forget, two key things in our industry is trust and integrity. And I think, a lot of that trust is built up from relationships you build up over many years. You trust your broker, or you trust the underwriter, and that's such an important value that takes time. You don't just do it literally on a face-to-face Zoom meeting. Yeah. So I think things like that are important. The connectivity, and I think one of the things which has helped me through my career is just bringing people together. Mm-hmm. And bringing people, people move around and you get to know them, and you go to one meeting and they talk about a challenge they've got and you think, oh, that was something he taught. Maybe we could get them together. Yeah. And those are, key things about developing relationships in this industry.
Yeah, and I think there's a sort of paying it forward kind of model. And I don't know if there's people in your sort of experience, your career, that have sort of painted this, but you're sort of famously generous with introductions and your time and as a mentor to young professionals. Were there people in sort of your early career that sort of instilled that in you? Because I think that's an unbelievably admirable sort of trait and generosity that you have to the young professionals that you mentor.
I just, I've been really, really fortunate. I've had an amazing run, and I always say to young people, they have half as much fun as I've had. They're going to have a great time. I grew up through the industry with really nobody. I had no mentors. There was nobody to really, there were no senior females that I could really turn to and say, can you help me out or whatever. I had one or two underwriters who were fantastic to me, and they were the people who really taught me a lot. I could go to for advice, who I would say really helped elevate my career. And I think everybody needs, that confidant, that person they look up to, they respect. And, one or two of the people I've worked for over the years have really inspired me. Their vision, how they operate, I think that's been something, enormous to me. And frankly, I just feel, people of my era who've had such a great run, we owe it. We owe it to the industry to help the next generation come through and continue to develop this industry more and more. And I think it would be poor if we just left it and didn't give anything back. I think it's very important we do give back.
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting when you talked about people here, and we talked about this I think a few weeks ago actually, is the people behind the professionals in some ways. And I know we hope to share behind your various intimidating titles that you're a very interesting person as well, who has other interests and hobbies like most of us. And to reflect on a personal experience, when I first started in the industry, I thought, I'm not allowed to talk about myself outside of work. I'm not allowed to have easy social conversations with my colleagues. That's but with friends, with your first job kind of scenario. It took a real while for me to work out, oh wait, actually some of the best business conversations I have and some of the most fruitful relationships I've built have been built through a shared interest in something completely different.
Absolutely. I mean, that's how you build friendships and relationships. It's through having shared things, hobbies, interests, just whatever, just having love. I mean, this is a really serious business, as we know, but also you have to have fun. And I'm a great believer of you've got to have fun as well. And I think you can engage people. The thing that always makes me actually sad is that I think because, maybe you're slightly unique in the sense, in the early days I was the only female. I suppose I walked around with an air of nervousness in many ways. You don't always have the self-confidence when you're younger. So people think you're very intimidating. In fact, you're not. You're actually probably more shy than they think. Yeah. So they always have this impression. And then when they get to know, oh, you're really normal. Like, yeah, actually, I'm really normal. I'm just a very normal person. So it's funny, isn't it? How you've got to get to know people. And when you get to know them, it's amazing how much more you get out of any discussion and also the business relationships too.
And what kind of topics or hobbies or interests come out, would you say, in your business relationships? Who is Vicky Carter when you're not talking about?
Okay, well, I'm passionate about design, interior design. So I love ripping buildings together, and actually got involved with Inigo doing their office.
Amazing.
Oh, so that was really good fun. I've never done an office before, and Richard Watson came to me and said, will you do our office? And I went, oh my goodness, man, that's a bit of a difference from doing your own house. Yeah. So I had a lot of fun with that, and actually doing some of that during lockdown. So challenging because you can't go and see anything, but luckily got a few connections, so that was helpful. I'm quite passionate about cars and driving, and I love travel. And sport. So I've grew up with three brothers. They all support different football teams. They're mad on rugby. My twin brother's mad on aeroplanes. So I've had planes rammed down my throat since I was about 2 years old. So I feel I know quite a lot about aviation, actually, for all the wrong reasons. And I love entertaining. So I love entertaining people at home. And to me, it's all about building, a great experience for them. So I may not be the best cook in the world, but I love getting it all ready. I love, putting the flowers out, making the place look great, sounds, lighting, candles, all that sort of stuff. So, so those are the things I'm really passionate about.
Very fun. And there's obviously it overlaps quite a lot with the elements of your role in the broking side and sort of a hosting of a lot of it is how do you build these experiences as you build teams and you go visit clients and all these types of things. It's much more nuanced and there's a lot in it to have that experience be sort of very rich the whole way through. So I can see there's some parallels with that.
Well, I think I've got a reputation for throwing good parties, which actually I don't think is a bad reputation.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So I love throwing a really good. And I've always had this attitude about things. You're going to do something, do it really well. People always say that's the best one we've ever been to. Well, otherwise, don't do it. Yeah. So maybe that's my competitive spirit coming out. I don't know.
Is there a particular industry event that's your favorite? Our industry obviously supports all manner of sporting events, and you have Ascot coming up now. Yeah. You have F1 events. Is there a particular one that you've always look forward to each year? It's on your calendar.
My Rising Professionals, come on. That's the greatest party. That's the gala night's going to be the greatest party you're going to have in this industry.
I mean, if the musical acts are as you've said, that's a pretty compelling.
This year they're going to be better. We've got 2 this year, which is really fun. So a little bit of what I like will come out in that. So to give a little tiny hint, but that's all I'm giving you.
Is it black tie?
It is black tie.
Very fun.
Absolutely. It's black tie, and we decorate the whole thing. So the theme this year is Navigating an Extraordinary World. So the place will be themed out like that, which is quite fun. So again, that's the design. You see the party, the design. It's all coming out.
Yeah. You'll have to get involved with whatever Lloyd's becomes as the room. You'll have to be involved with how
with the redesign. What else?
Become.
I mean, look, I've been very fortunate over the years. People, obviously, today there isn't the entertainment. There used to be. There used to be some very excessive trips. We used to have some wonderful trips. Down in Australia, I've done some great things. I mean, I've been very fortunate. I've been to some amazing wine tastings around the world. Been very, very lucky. I was at Glyndebourne last week. So there's still some lovely things to do. But it is a social industry, and we're very, very fortunate. And I think anybody in this industry is in a great space and is very fortunate. you consider what's going on, and people really struggling, people worried whether they can pay their energy bills next year. It's a very sorry state in 2022 to be in that situation. So I think we're all very, very fortunate to have jobs and have that security.
Absolutely. And I guess specifically the job route that you have chosen, which I hope you're very happy about, is to go down the reinsurance route specifically and to get, I guess, closer to capital in that sense. I have to ask you, as this is the reinsurance podcast, what makes reinsurance special?
Again, probably by fault, I sort of fell into reinsurance. So I really didn't know I didn't even know what the word, reinsurance meant when I was first sort of thrown into it. So it was probably a fortunate fall, to be honest. By the way, I forgot to say one thing I'm absolutely passionate about. So my probably biggest passion in life is music. Okay. I'm a music freak. So I've just seen the Stereophonics. We're going to Coldplay. Oh, nice. I've got Crowded House coming up, to name but a few. Anyway, sorry, I throw that bit back in. Back to the serious question, reinsurance. So I think what's really fascinating by the reinsurance side is all your clients are professionals in the industry. So they obviously have a deep understanding of the industry. So when you get into discussions with them, it's you're having that one-on-one discussion about a topic that we're both heavily involved with. On the retail side, you're dealing, say, with members of the public or people who are not so aware. So there's probably a bit more teaching of how we operate. And the area I've always been involved with is probably close to the action. So it's the highly volatile, the retrocessional business is where I sort of grew up in the industry. So having that exposure. And then that's really morphed just because of the relationships I've been able to build up really all over the world, thankfully, from, again, just traveling to moving into sort of more strategic, which has led into sort of capital, which goes into M&A and all those sides. And to me, that's a fascinating side of the industry because it's something that's continually changing. So having to ensure you understand what are the challenges that CEOs have today, what are the things that keep them awake at night, and that's our job, is to really understand what is their issue, what's their challenge, and to try and come up with the right solutions or creativity around their portfolios to enhance their business.
Yeah, and over your career, that you'll have seen sort of an evolution across that space and the problem sets.
Yeah.
How are you seeing technology sort of evolving and impacting kind of what these solutions look like, how companies think about data, et cetera?
Hugely. I mean, digitalization it has to happen in the industry. The industry's got to digitalize. It's got to, it's got to come up to modern day standards around that. Just from an efficiency point of view, the cost of everything, you just see what technology can deliver. And I think, the more and more partnerships there are between insurance companies and new technology coming into the industry, the quicker that will all advance. And it's something that needs to be done to keep pace with, what's going on, not just in our industry, but, all around the world in everything that's touched. Everything is going so much more sort of digital orientated. Just the way young people, interact, it's all digital these days. You don't have conversation, you don't pick up the phone. Phone? What's a phone? You use Snapchat and all these other things. So we have to change. We've got to keep pace, and if we don't keep pace, we're going to, there are going to be challenges along the way.
And within the world of things that technology could affect, this is a balance we try to strike really carefully at Superseed. What are the things you think should be preserved? I know we talked about face-to-face, and what are the bits that we really don't want people wasting their time on doing manually? And
well,
so
it's things like, providing insight into risk is so important to understand risk better. The more you can understand risk and the more data you can get, the better the selection should be. So you'd like to think that that's a key part of underwriting in the future. And getting real-time information, the speed of which things can be done, decisions can be made using technology is critical. You look at AI, you look at some of the incredible stuff going on in AI and the development around that, and whether it's in medicine or whether it's in technical or whether it's on satellites. Again, I'm going to be involved this week in some of the cohorts coming out of the lab, and there's some amazing, ideas, new products coming out of that in all different fields of our industry. So to me, it's the advancement of that which will lead to, as I say, greater insight, more data, more information, getting things quicker. And then you've got the whole area of it's not just about new products, it's about prevention. So, technology is going to be hugely important in preventative measures. So around that, and again, better information so you can, put in place things to protect events from happening. So I think in all areas, it's so complex and it's changing so fast, and trying to stay on top of it. And we've seen a lot of, technology companies try to come into this space, and many of them have failed, and some will succeed. And I think it's, for any company, it's a challenge walking through all the different options they've got and making sure their selection of the right ones. And I think you'll see more partnerships, because rather than acquisitions into, say, insurtechs, I think partnerships are probably the way a lot of the insurance companies will go. But I think everybody's trying to improve and enhance their own digital strategy. It's got to be right at the top of any board discussion.
Yeah, I think the concept of helping introducing preventative measures for insurers is going to be so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
That we're talking about on an earlier episode, just indemnity and the concept of it. But if we don't have to have it where you're getting things rebuilt and getting things repaired, and we have it where you're protected up front, I think it's an amazing mechanism for us to help with. And you're seeing some technology play a role there. Insurers and brokers historically have done a really good job by helping companies understand, if you think about construction in classes like that, they've always been really good at helping introduce measures to reduce the likelihood of fire or flooding, etc. I think going forward, what we can do from a technology point of view could really help accelerate and impact that. And hopefully that helps elevate and transition the industry from one that pays indemnity and helps you rebuild to a really essential asset to people's lives to help make sure that they avoid losses. So I think there's a big opportunity for us to move into that space as we grow.
And you just think back. I mean, when I came into the industry in 1980, there was no modelling at all. And I remember when an underwriter came to me, one of our clients, he was so excited one lunchtime, and he said, "I've just seen this amazing thing. It's called CatMap, but it's just shown me that I've got 1.3 billion of exposure around New Orleans, in low-lying housing." And he said, "Can you place me a new 5 million top layer?" Well, you look back now and it's almost farcical. I think people, young people look at you as if you're completely sort of prehistoric. But that's what it was like. There wasn't any, there was no modelling. We had no data. It was just, a few numbers of, the amount of income they were writing. There were about 5 or 6 programs which you had to fill in your share on that, and losses. That was all we broke with. And that was for cat business. So it's moved so far on, and you look at the technology going into modeling, using AI and all the models that are out there for whether it's on cyber, modeling cyber. I mean, again, cyber, that was who'd heard of cyber back in 1980? It didn't even register that would be the fastest growing class. So things have moved, and they will continue to move, and probably in 10 years' time we'll all be talking about something new. I mean, climate liability. Yeah, there's something new that's going to be an interesting challenge. Are people really considering around that now? Geopolitical landscape. Look at the issues that's causing at the moment. So it's just an ever-changing industry, which is why it's exciting.
It does feel like we're in a constant race to keep up with our clients, I guess. And at the start of the insurance company trying to keep up with their corporate and consumer clients, then the reinsurers trying to keep up, or the brokers and the reinsurers trying to keep up with their insurance customer or client customer needs, and so on. And then, to your point, right the way up to retrocessionaires, who are going to have to somehow bring together enough data to understand something that an insurer has offered to a customer, that a reinsurer has added to their portfolio, and try and understand what that does to
and then the whole pricing cycle, and the challenges that will have. If the retro pricing goes too high, then people will cut back on the retro, and then if they don't buy retro, they won't write the reinsurance, and then if they don't write, it's just a cycle, isn't it? It's a cycle.
Well, I think this is the thing we need to do a better job of articulating to like a younger audience, because their vision is like a beige office with someone who writes renters insurance. But like in reality, it's a constantly moving target of super complex business challenges that take into account things we're trying to solve for in price that have no real answer yet, right? How do we solve for climate costs? Like, we don't know, but we have to figure out our best way to do so. And like, it's unbelievably fascinating if we can attract people who want to solve those problems and not present ourselves as like,
well, what's really interesting to me is I think some of the younger talent that certainly just through, again, rising professionals, we've got a whole session, 2-hour session in InsurTech. And some of the young dynamic CEOs who've built unbelievably sophisticated but successful businesses coming in to talk, these are the people who are going to shape what happens in the future. And it's not all about experience is really important for a lot of ways, but we've got to give talented, different young individuals an opportunity to open up and bring their ideas into this industry. And I think that's where we've got to get better at opening up the industry to a much wider talent base and bringing in different skill sets, because we need people who've got that real technical understanding. My generation don't. I mean, half of us will probably, confirm that we can't do this and that on the computer. The young generation, it's all innate to them. It comes, comes with the territory. So I think, we've got to be better at getting different skill sets and going out to different pools of people. If you fish in the same pool, you're all going to get the same. If you all get the same, you're all going to look alike and you're going to have the same ideas. That's what you don't want. You want people who are going to challenge how things are done. Just because it's been done like this for 100 years, why is that the correct way? And I love it when we meet young, really dynamic, inspiring people who've got completely different ideas and different product ideas. That's what we need. And that's the fun, certainly having sort of been close to the Lloyd's Lab on several occasions. You just see some really interesting things coming in from young people who haven't got anything, to do with this industry initially, but as a great opportunity to bring those products in. So I'd like to see that the industry develop much more in that direction in the future. That's what I call diversity.
Yeah,
that's what's really interesting to me about diversity.
Totally. I think the example that came to mind is back in my Aon days, we did some outreach to some of the varied schools that they had in the neighbourhoods. All sorts of different people were bringing in who weren't from the same generation or from the same background, all sorts of different ideas and experiences. And we ran a session for them where they got to create their own company that was going to be an insurance customer, do an analysis of all of its risks, and work out which ones we were going to be able to insure, which ones we had to avoid, which ones we could mitigate, and so on. And some of the company concepts I'd not even heard of, and I was like, I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know you could buy that or do that. You did one the other day where you've apparently been buying plants online. Which I didn't know you could do.
What about a great thing? Things like IVF, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of couples can't conceive. Has there ever been an insurance cover you could take out in the event you don't? Well, guess what? There is now. That came through the Lloyd's Lab. What a great idea, because it's expensive for young people. So, that's just one very extreme example. And there are others, very extreme in other respects, like people building these amazing units to go on satellites. They used to be the size of a house. They're now the size of, a tiny little thing. And, they can look through cloud, they can look through anything and feedback real-time data. The stuff that's out there is incredible, but it's moving so fast.
Yeah, and the only limitation is our imagination for it. And I think you're seeing, as technology becomes more ubiquitous now, this real ability for people to look at what would have been 5, 6, 10 years ago, very far-reaching sort of concepts, actually are now becoming accessible. There's enough access to data, there's enough access to technology tools that allow you to sort of go, well, there actually is a way we can now build IVF sort of treatment in insurance products, because we know we can capture information to help cost and price it. Like, we're solving some really interesting and challenging problems now, and I think that's one of the most exciting things in the space.
Well, think about the next generation. They're the ones who are focused on climate change. They're the ones, where this is going to be really critical to. So, seeing some of the ideas around that again and encouraging them to come forward. That's where companies have got to be much more open, is to letting their young talent come through and, put their ideas on the table, listen to them, get them to challenge us. That's what makes a company more successful.
Absolutely. There's probably many of us who are sort of looking at what will the world be like if the climate increases by a certain number of degrees, if disaster frequency occurs, and many of our existing sort of cohort of leaders will say, well, I'll be retired by then. So.
I know, and that's a really selfish attitude. I mean, to me, that's just so wrong to think like that.
Exactly.
Again, we have a responsibility. So, we need to start thinking about it's too late to think about it. We need to get on with things and action it.
Yeah. When you think about, the future of the industry and where things go, again, you, as Ben mentioned, you sort of wear two hats, but with your broker hat on, where do you see the challenges that the brokers face as they work to solve these complex problems with clients, and where do you think their role evolves in the value chain?
I think it's all about providing value. People will pay if you provide value. And I think what's important is for the brokers to become closer and closer to their clients, to really understand what the challenges are, which I think I mentioned earlier. That to me is the role of a broker, to understand and help them solve those, whether it's through modeling, whether it's through bringing new ideas, new businesses to them, whatever. Oh, there's a little crash in the background. So to me, that's a critical piece we have to play. I think the importance is to keep evolving. I think where Lloyd's has been very successful over the years is, it's a 350-year institution, but it's evolved and it's kept evolving. That's what's kept it relevant. And its challenges now is to keep evolving, into the future, keep pace with what's going on in the world, and ensure that it remains a viable platform for people to operate on. It's incredibly valued for a number of reasons, like its capital structure, its leverage, its licenses, its infrastructure, its intellectual capital. But it's also got to ensure that it's competitive in terms of pricing to operate on. The ratings are invaluable as well for people. So I think there's a whole host of things that everybody's got a part to play in how do we continue to evolve this industry, whether you're a broker, whether you're an underwriter, whether you're a corporation, whether you're an actuary. I think we all have different roles to play. But certainly for us as a broker, it's really understanding the big issues out there and finding solutions, whether it's through providing more data or or modeling, or helping our clients to grow and evolve and become more profitable.
And I guess in that spirit, with an expert on capital here with us on the call, on the podcast, do you think that the reinsurance capital available today is going to look the same in 10, 20 years' time? I know we've seen a few big exits from lines of business recently, for example, and we've seen alternative forms of capital coming in for a long time, almost always emerging, never quite fully emerged. What do you think it's going to look like as a space in a couple of decades?
God, if I could answer that, I'd probably be in big demand. I think it depends what type of capital it is. I think every capital is different. So if you look what's going on at the moment, cat bond area, cat bond market is sort of dried up now, and that could change over months to come. But I think capital, a lot of capital that came into the market after the last sort of big catastrophic events, they thought they were coming in to pick up cat losses, so some of the alternative market capital. And, to have shocks like COVID, thrown at them, wildfires, which was never considered a cat loss, they don't like shocks like that. And they have to, mark to market in terms of valuations of the fund. So that gave them, huge challenges, and then they had money trapped. So, I think it spooked a lot of them, and you saw the retraction, big retraction of that, which caused issues for, a number of companies, both in sidecars and, alternative placements. Then you've got the pension funds who, look at things very differently. They have a much longer sort of horizon, so they don't necessarily need the returns that, say, some of the funds want, and the funds have a shorter time frame, so they usually be anything from 5 to 7 years. Some have stayed in longer, so there needs to be a sort of exit strategy with the pension funds, as say, a lower multiple to deliver. And then you go into things like trade capital, which has been very important at Lloyd's, and I think will have its own challenges this year, as a lot of companies are nervous and shying away from cat in many respects. So that could cause them their own issues and challenges and losses. And you've got the whole Ukraine situation, you've had COVID, you've got cat losses. It's been challenging. So the question is, number one, is the pricing right for cat? That's a big question. You've got the threat of inflation coming up. You've got interest rate environment. What's going to happen to reserves? All these things, and I think capital will be nervous in many respects. There will be some that will see this as a wonderful opportunity to come in. They'll say rating environment's been good. So this is a good time to come in, and particularly if capacity sort of shrinks back, then certain people will use that as an opportunity to come in. So I think it very much varies on who you're talking to and how they look at the environment.
Yeah, and do you see that at all being related to the interest in new challenger reinsurance brokers being either created or bought or similar.
Yeah, well, I
of
mean,
late,
at the moment, if you look at the valuations, I mean, you look at the valuations of some of the MGA platforms, and you look at the valuations of the brokers, and they've been extraordinary, multiples.
Yeah.
Which how long that continues for is a big question mark. I don't think you can really answer that question. But like anything, there'll always be some highly successful operations that always sell at multiples, and maybe some that are sort of flatter.
Yeah.
And again, it comes down to, like everything, with operations. To me, it's all about what's the leadership like? A strong leadership, strong management with a great track record. You should be able to draw a good successful multiple.
Absolutely. Brilliant.
That was an unbelievably fascinating episode. We've got a few minutes. Do we have any games planned?
We don't. Let's see, unless you want to invent a game especially for our special guest.
So we have
wow.
we're gonna do this on the fly now.
Okay. I'm game.
So we normally, one of our favorite games with guests is analogy battles. So with Mark Gagan, we did reinsurance. What is a reinsurance broker? We've done Lloyd's previously.
Should we tackle the Underwriter?
I think we should. So the analogy battle is, well, do we want to do what is a reinsurance underwriter?
Yeah, with no preparation acknowledged.
So
no, going to be terrible.
No one has prepared anything, but we have to create an analogy in layman's terms that describes what a reinsurance underwriter is similar to, or analogous to.
Oh, that's easy.
Oh, I like the confidence.
Here we go. Okay.
What is an underwriter? An underwriter is the equivalent of a bookie. So what do? They look at the field of horses.
Mm-hmm.
They work out, the form. So they look at historical track record of the horses, who the riders are, and then they set the bets. So that's exactly what an underwriter does. He looks at the information in front of him about the risks that he's viewing.
Yeah.
He will then look at the track record. He'll look at maybe who the company is, who it's run by, historical, how they're looking to go forward. So what is their sort of future, profile? And they will put a price on the risk according to that information. That is what an underwriter is. Offsetting risk.
I think that's a flawless analogy battle. Should we even try to compete, or we just give her the... That was exceptionally good.
I've probably upset every underwriter out there, so apologies to anybody who's listening.
And probably where the word track record comes from.
Ooh.
Oh, very good.
Perhaps.
On the rails.
Yeah, and all those other terms, exactly.
All the other.
I think that's spot on, because you're looking at what's the likelihood of this thing paying a loss, etc. So I think that's a spot on analogy battle.
Yeah.
Oh.
I can contribute one to make it look even better.
Okay.
Come on,
I'm being less. So this is one that comes from the startup and technology angle to complement rather than try and compete with the flawless analogy you already expressed. One of the things we found fascinating when we moved from the world of reinsurance into startup land was that you had all these venture capital investors. And we realized over time that they are basically the same as reinsurance underwriters, because what they do is they create a portfolio filled with a share of lots of different risks that they know one day at least one or two of them will be huge. Except in the venture capital environment, of course, it's a huge victory because they get a unicorn billionaire company that they own a small piece of. And in the reinsurance world, it's a small piece of an enormous loss that they really hoped wouldn't happen. So in many ways, reinsurance underwriters are venture capitalists, but looking at it upside down.
So I'm going to have to bribe you to hear what Mr. Gagan had to say about a broker. He was probably very rude and said all we do is go to lunch.
No, what did he called them?
No, he likened reinsurance brokers to a Catholic priest that you could confess to. And
you confess all your sins to, and then they absorb all of that and present back.
Absolutely. And believe me, I could write a book. But I'm not going to.
Yeah.
So anybody who knows me, you're safe. Don't worry.
The collective sigh of relief has gone across podcast land now.
Oh, boy.
Wonderful. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. We'll do an update on this podcast after your event and disclose who are the performers so that we can get a massive list.
I would love to. I'll come back and
year.
tell you all about it.
Yeah.
It's been great fun. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
Thank you very much. And you've gotten the crown for the best analogy battle
for
this one. So wonderful. Well, thank you again, Vicky. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, thanks for having me.